Good morning and welcome to the September 11th mid-month meeting for the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission. I will turn it over to Becky to go through today's rules.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll just quickly go over a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and on cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. Unless you're participating during the meeting, please turn your video off, and this allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting, and when you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble during the meeting, you can send a chat to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distraction during the meeting, and with that, I'll turn it back over to the Vice Chair.
Thank you. So today we're going to continue our discussion of the Land Development Code. I believe Elizabeth is here to speak with us this morning. So unless there's an objection, my plan would be to hear from Elizabeth and then have public comment and then bring it back to the group for discussion. So without objection, we'll then pass it on to Elizabeth.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I have a shorter presentation this morning, and I will go ahead and jump into that and then follow your instructions about where you want to go with the conversation. All right. I can see it on the screens over your shoulders, so let's go ahead and get going. Okay, so today we are at our halfway point on the meeting, on the reviewing and discussion meetings, and I have some background information to share with us, and then we'll jump into the content. For today, we're going to go through the project goals, our review schedule, how anyone can find the draft on the website. I have a list of the Planning Commission's running edits to go through today, so you can see where you are with everything. Topics covered at this meeting, applicable city land development policies for this meeting's topics, overview of the environmentally sensitive lands and landscaping standards, and community comment. Just a reminder, our 4 goals are implementing the plan to create more predictable development outcomes. We're looking at simplifying and streamlining development procedures and making the land development code more user-friendly for a range of users. We are in the extended adoption review phase of our project, working our way through a series of important topics to the community and gathering input and recommending changes. Here's the detailed schedule. We are here at September 11th, talking about occupancy limits, landscaping, environmentally sensitive lands, commercial development, and returning to the parking discussion. If we make it through all of this today, that will free up next September 23rd and 25th for discussion, however the Planning Commission sees fit. Just to remind everybody, there's a version of the draft on the project website. It was posted in July. It will be there through late September. It is open for public comment. It will not be revised until the Planning Commission has reviewed its schedule. And we are working on creating a list of proposed changes from the Planning Commission or the steering committee to be posted on the website. Those should be up shortly. Just in case you're a visual learner, this is what you're looking for on the project website. There is a big red button that says Adoption Review Draft, and then the document itself is surrounded by a box with the green header on top. So Planning Commission, you've been working pretty darn diligently. I wanted to pull together the substantive edits that you've been talking about. I have another list of non-substantive edits to work through, but just to remind everybody where we are, because it may start to get confusing at some point. You've discussed, and I believe the group is on board with exempting R1, R2, and R3 infill development from minimum density standards and requiring R5 and R4 and R5 development to provide as many units as are feasibly possible on the lot. Second edit is requiring notice of building permit requests to be sent to neighbors and neighborhood associations for single unit and duplex applications. Number 3, make bicycle circulation design requirements applicable to all development. There were a few exemptions in the draft. Number 4, on the circulation plan, adjust the language to say that new development doesn't get a waiver because there's no surrounding infrastructure. There was also a discussion about requiring the applicant to show the various modes of transportation trade-offs that were made as part of the circulation plan. I'm not sure this one got a vote from the Planning Commission. It did get discussion, and we may want to flag that to bring back. Number 5, clarify when sidewalks are required for redevelopment and when they can be waived. 6, link the traffic impact study requirements with the threshold standards that already exist in Chapter 22. 7 is some terminology clarification. Use either residential multi-unit or multi-unit dwelling, and review the definition to more clearly distinguish those from other residential types. And then 8 is establish a 90-day post-adoption grace period for zoning map corrections. These corrections must be related to a mapping conversion error, not a rezoning request. And we can come back to this if it is your pleasure at some point. Let's get through the presentation. So for this morning, we're going to start with occupancy standards. We've got some content on mixed and commercial zoning districts, uses and use standards, and site and structure development. Not a lot there. We have not received comments there, and I'll show you in a minute. The changes are not super significant. We do have content on Article 13, environmentally sensitive lands and natural resources, and 14, landscaping and buffering. And I pulled back the conversation that Planning Commission had on these topics in June, just as a reminder so we don't start from zero. So moving into occupancy standards, and we will come back to this, so this is preview. This slide shows the current requirements, and they are zoning district based and dwelling type based. So it is essentially 3 or 4 unrelated occupants per dwelling unit. I've left out group homes or group living situations because they get exempted from this. So you can see in the lower density districts, it's a maximum of 3. And in the medium or higher density districts, it's a maximum of 4, depending on unit type. The proposed change is to say that occupancy is based on a household, and a household is either a single person occupying a dwelling unit, any number of people related to each other by blood or marriage, and or committed partnership. This I believe the blood or marriage also is an exemption from unrelated occupants, and so we can get into that if we need to. The changes, number 3, up to 5 adults of any relationship plus their minor children, and then 4 is up to 8 older adults who don't meet the definition of assisted living or congregate living use. So for the discussion today, I worked primarily with the 5 unrelated adults, and to show you on the next slide, tried to simplify this to show you what the change would be essentially by unit type, by zoning district. So here's our current baseline in the R1 and R2. We're at essentially 3 people per dwelling unit, R3 to R5, 4 people per dwelling unit. So coming across by dwelling unit types, we have in the single unit detached R1 and R2, your max occupancy right now is going to be 3. Proposed change is 5. And so that's a change of 2 people per dwelling unit. I want to remind everyone this is a dwelling unit measurement, not a bedroom measurement. So it's the unit itself. Then in the same thing for single family detached, it's a maximum of 4. That moves to 5. That's a change of 1 person. For duplexes, maximum is 6, proposed change to be 10. That's a change of 4 people over both units. This is a total summary change. And then R3 to R5, that's a 2-person change. We move into single unit detached, which is allowed in R1 and R2, but I also want to remind everybody that there's a significant minimum lot size requirement to get to 3 or more units. So there are, as we've talked about, multiple layers of regulation to get through before reaching that 3-unit threshold. Right now, the maximum unrelated occupancy would be 9. The proposed change, it would go up to 15. So that would be 6 people across 3 units. I calculated this just at 3 units, just to standardize it. In the R3 to R5, the current max is 12. The proposed change would be 15, so that'd be a change of 1 person per unit. And then we move into multi-units, so apartments. These are not allowed in R1 and R2, so that occupancy change doesn't make a difference. In R3 to R5, the maximum is 5 per unit. It's 4 per unit, I apologize, and that would change to 5 per unit, so it's a change of 1 person per unit.
Elizabeth, please remind me, does occupant include children?
It includes children. Children, I don't believe children are counted, and I would look to Becky and Jeff on that. They're kind of swept up into the number, so we're looking at adults here.
Okay, and how do you define an adult? 18 and older, or have a driver's license and older, or?
If I remember correctly, I think it's 18 and older. It's the age at which you pass from being a minor to an adult under law, but again, I'm probably out over my skis. I don't do that part of the code usually this early in the morning, so I may not have that exactly right.
The driver's license, I'm just thinking about when someone would most likely have a car. Is that 18 now or 16 now, or?
14.
That's how old I am.
Kansas.
Well, you can get a permit for. You can't get a driver's license at 14.
That's true. They changed.
Let's put a note here. I will look that one up while you guys are discussing. So I'm just gonna add a note on it.
Why don't we make a note? Yeah, we'll make a note to find out, and we'll finish the presentation.
I'll get it.
Yeah.
I'll get it while we're looking.
And my plan, again, object, and we can do however people would like, but my thought is we'll let her give her talk, hear public comment, and then try to come back topic by topic. I don't know if that will work, but that will be my goal. So we will come back to the slide.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back on that one. Okay, so moving into, so that's the occupancy discussion framed for you guys to work through. Moving into major changes to environmentally sensitive lands and landscaping. Just to go through this list, we have carried forward the current environmentally sensitive lands protections. We've added stormwater drainage setbacks linked to watersheds. So this is stream buffers and natural drainage path protection. Just put a note there. Planning Commission talked about extending that to non-natural to created drainage paths. So I have that flagged in a future slide. Adding erosion, we've added erosion and sediment control standards. We've added low impact development standards that are linked to the Mid-America Regional Council LID standards. So this is where you can get into rain gardens and on-site stormwater mitigation, simple techniques and slightly more complex techniques. We've added steep slope and ridgeline development standards. We've incorporated the cluster development standards into the city regulations. I think previously they were just applicable to Douglas County. We've carried forward the tree preservation standards. We've prioritized the use of native and low water plant types, and we have a discussion point on that today. We've consolidated and reduced the landscaping buffer requirements, and then we've carried forward and updated screening requirements. So those are the major changes. We can come back to this list anytime you want to. Major changes in the mixed and commercial zoning districts. So this is the section where I said the changes we've made are good and useful going forward, but not a significant change, and certainly haven't drawn a great deal of public comment, with the exception of the parking requirements, which we've been discussing. So we've realigned the mixed district purposes to meet different development scale options across Lawrence. We've carried forward the downtown zoning, converted some of the commercial and office districts to mixed districts, and this is our theme in Lawrence. We haven't made a lot of change in terms of non-residential uses. What we've done is made a lot of change in where residential is allowed, and then a little backfilling into where non-residential is allowed in residential, and we discussed that at the last meeting. We've eliminated most of the use-specific size restrictions in commercial development to encourage redevelopment. Those were holding up the reuse of some sites across Lawrence. We have, as we've discussed, eliminated minimum parking requirements. They've been reincorporated for residential, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here, although they would apply to the mixed use, the residential aspects of it. We've updated and incorporated the community design manual, and then we've added new adaptive reuse standards for non-historic uses. So this is the commercial being converted to residential situation, which we're seeing more of. So that's all in the draft right now. So let's jump in to some of the content on environmentally sensitive lands and natural resources. So reminding everybody of the June 12th Planning Commission discussion issues here. You discussed, and I have brought this back to see if you want to have any further formal discussion about it or provide us with guidance about where the commission wants to go. Amending drainage, the natural drainage setbacks to apply to both natural and altered areas. The example you discussed was Fall Creek. And then to adjust the width based on existing development and create a retrofit alternative. And then you also discussed requiring stormwater infiltration requirements in parking lot landscaping. And we have some slightly more extensive notes on that coming up in another slide. So these are the things that you may want to circle back to in addition to anything else you want to talk about this morning. So policy for environment and natural resources located in Chapter 2 of Plan 2040. We got just a couple policy slides today. So policies we're getting at are mitigating impacts caused by noise and light pollution and development activities, fostering and encouraging healthy lifestyle options through development and design of the built environment, developing sustainable interconnected multimodal transportation system, develop strategies for the adaptive reuse of existing structures, and utilizing green infrastructure and best management practices to manage stormwater impacts. So this is specifically related to environment and natural resources. We do have some additional policies when we get into the landscaping section. So the environmentally sensitive lands and natural resources section is applicable to all new development, all redevelopment, and an applicant submitting a major site plan or a minor site plan would need to come into compliance with this section. And in a redevelopment scenario, they're going to come into compliance on a sliding scale. The city is going to weigh how the application should apply to the extent they haven't been applied already. We have had some discussion around the floodplain management regulations. They are carried forward from current Article 12. We've discussed the fact that this is a multi-layer regulatory process. It is not just the city of Lawrence, it's the city of Lawrence and the state of Kansas. And the state signs off on the city's regulations. So we've kept in place what the city currently has in place, anticipating the normal rounds of updates in the future as the state regulations change. So we have received public comment on this, requesting either or notice of administrative decision-making or a change from administrative decision-making. We have a floodplain administrator right now who makes decisions. So a change from that to a public meeting or public hearing decision-making process. Planning and development staff did check with the state. The best practice in this area across Kansas is literally uniformly across Kansas is administrative decision-making. There are no communities that use a public hearing, public meeting process. So when we tackled this one this morning, we need to look at it from a policy perspective, not necessarily a land development code perspective. The city's approach has been in line with what the state requires. And if the city wants to consider stepping out of that line, we need to understand the umbrella under which we're going to work. And there was truly no flood joke meant with the umbrella comment there. But guess that's where my brain is this morning. Moving on, So you'll probably remember this slide. These are our stormwater drainage setbacks. So the purpose of this is natural drainage path protection. And so it's moving development out of the way of where the water would normally go and putting some reasonable setbacks in there. This is a life safety issue. In addition to a health of the stream or the water issue, so we're looking at water quantity and water quality. Stormwater management section does have grading and revegetation standards outside of the protected areas and erosion prevention and sediment control requirements. We've also in the draft built in the city's built-in links to the city's stormwater permitting requirements to let everybody know that there will be permitting processes. Moving into steep slopes and ridgeline development. So we've drafted regulations that are applicable to lots with an average slope equal to or greater than 15% or that have stability issues. We've set a no-build standard for slopes at or greater than 20%, and then construction standards for those slopes between 15 and 20%. In other articles related to environmentally sensitive lands protection, just to remind everybody, we've got the cluster development standards, the cottage court, the courtyard development standards, and the small lot development standards. So in addition to these being useful to provide housing, they are useful to move development off of environmentally sensitive lands and keep those areas open and working in the way that environmentally sensitive lands work. So then we move into Article 14, landscaping and buffering. We have a number of subsections in this article. Our big picture topic items, so our policy from Plan 2040, is both, it's pretty high level. So we look at systems, and that links to how we're doing stormwater too. We're doing it on a systems basis. So in Plan 2040, we have resources such as woodlands, prairies, and soils, wildlife habitats, and overall ecosystem services. And we're looking at managing in those areas to maintain natural functions and ensure sustainability. So that's why we've gone back in with the steep slope requirements. That's why we've got the tree preservation requirements coming up, wildlife habitat considerations. So we worked at this list and we see kind of, we're looking at the natural systems. We're looking then at how soils and ag work together. Probably most of this in the county, not as much of it in the city, but thinking about mitigation and erosion. And then kind of as we funnel ourselves down, we're looking at open space creation and then use of native plantings. And that's probably where we're going to focus most of our time today on 212, encourage the use of native plantings, because we've had some questions come up about how best to implement that. So landscaping applicability, again, with a major minor site plan review, there are some exemptions. The construction or expansion of one single family detached or one duplex unit does not have to do landscape review, and all ag uses. At the June 12th Planning Commission discussion, we wanted to make sure, excuse me, that we're capturing landscaping when multiple units are proposed, including ensuring that multiple duplexes go through site plan review. So that was just a double check on what's going in the code. So we move into required landscaping. So this is the applicability table. What's required, more requirements for attached multi-unit manufactured housing community. Sorry, I need to update that in the code. Non-residential and mixed use. So you'll see the landscaping requirements are lighter for that detached or two-unit dwelling, one dwelling, or one unit, and they're more significant when we're doing more development. Street trees, we've carried forward the current standards. One street tree is required per 40 feet of public or private street frontage. Species diversity is required. They need to be spaced evenly, but they can be clustered in specific circumstances. And there are credits for maintaining existing trees. Parking lot landscaping, also current standards. This is applicable to off-street parking lots with 11 or more parking spaces. It could be waived for narrow lots. It will still be applicable, even without required parking, without required minimum parking, because the 11 or more spaces will trigger it. So an applicant chooses to do commercial parking, then they will be putting in parking lot landscaping. There's a minimum landscape area of 40 square feet of area per parking space. Read that as a measurement. So you add up the number of parking spaces you have, multiply it by 40, and then you have your landscape area, and that gets distributed throughout the parking lot. It's not that each parking space gets a shrub. It's more of a cumulative effect. And then the parking lot landscaping can be within the parking lot or in the perimeter of the parking lot. Okay, so you had a fairly extensive discussion about parking lot landscaping related to stormwater management required for new parking lots and redeveloped parking lots, and what would be required for existing parking lots. I believe the recommendation was require it for new lots and then set a trigger for redevelopment. And this is something we can come back to and clarify as a group. These are the buffer yard standards. So the buffer yard is triggered by a new development that is somewhat different from the adjacent development, and the buffer yard goes in on the site of the new development. You can see in the image on the right that there are 3 sizes of buffer yard and different planting requirements. And so the larger, more intensely planted buffer yard gets put between something like an industrial use and perhaps a mixed use. So they're used to create the buffer based on the potential incompatibility of the uses, of the structures and the uses they'll ultimately hold. So coming around to plant materials, the regulations right now call for the use of native, naturalized, and xeriscape materials. They include minimum plant sizes and heights, required species mix. There is an allowance to keep existing trees and vegetation. Some tree preservation is required. Right now, some irrigation is required, and there's ongoing maintenance and replacement of plants required. So at the June 12th Planning Commission meeting, you discussed providing an update to the tree species list and moving that perhaps to a regional resource, reconsidering irrigation in terms of water use, and talking about maintenance requirements for street trees. The city does maintain the street trees in the right-of-way, and the property owner maintains street trees on private property. So we can come back to this. And then I wanted to share recent landscaping comments and conversation. We had a talk with some members of the former Sustainability Advisory Board, and you may be aware that that board created a 2022 draft landscaping recommendations. And so I'm kind of jumping to the second bullet here. Those recommendations suggest a minimum of 20% of the pervious surface area of any parcel landscaped as a managed natural landscape. And so that's consisting of plant species intended to be growing to their natural heights and form in a natural setting, naturalistic setting, and combinations. So let's just back up. Why would you do this? This native landscaping are plants that have evolved to grow in Lawrence, in the region, and they do well. Usually they do well with less water, and they can ebb and flow with the seasons, sometimes harsh seasons in Kansas. So while we had some technical difficulties on this call, my takeaway is that there's a question for the Planning Commission of should there be some use of native plant material required in landscaping? We did have 2 planning commission members on the call, and I think they have more background on this subject than I do, so I will defer to how they want to steer this conversation. I would point out that Plan 2040 landed on encourage the use of native plants, and we are looking at requiring the use of native plants. So one of the reasons we flagged this change and brought it back to you is that is a change from what the plan is calling for. We had, during that discussion, and in our experience at Clarion, we just want to flag a couple of enforcement and compliance challenges. These aren't deal breakers. We've talked about enforcement and compliance challenges across a lot of things we're doing in the code, but just to make sure everybody is knowledgeable on the subject. Native plants are typically allowed to grow taller than you would have a turf grass landscape grow. So sometimes they get weedy. Sometimes property owners just don't have the background to understand that you actually have to weed your native plants. But that height difference can make enforcement and compliance a challenge. It makes your enforcement and compliance folks the plant police, which is something they can be trained to do. It adds one more thing to the list. And it will require the creation of some sort of probably pretty simple landscaping plan by the property owner to make that enforcement work a little more simply. So we'll come back to this when you guys are ready for it. So then we also have the follow-up on the parking discussion. This is where we left it after the August 28th meeting. We were at the bottom of the slide trying to figure out if there was consensus about residential infill minimum, and I can bring the parking slides back if we need them. So this mostly just gathers up the threads from your conversation to see where anyone might want to jump in to finish this up. If we get to it before we wrap today. Looking ahead, we do have 2 meetings at the end of the month, September 23rd and 25th. Depending on how far we get today, they are open for discussion. We do have a packed discussion agenda today, so we'll see what carries over and what else you might want to bring up, but just letting the public know where we are with this. So that's the end of the PowerPoint today, and I will turn it back to the vice chair to move into your next steps, and then I'm ready to bring slides back up whenever you guys are ready.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So at this point, I think we'll turn to public comment. We have about 90 minutes left, and we have a lot to cover today. So we'll turn to public comment. Each person will have 3 minutes. We don't have the timer clock, so Becky will keep time, and I'll raise my hand when you're at your 3 minutes, and we'd ask that you kindly wrap up at that point. And then I'll bring it back, and I'm thinking if we pick topic by topic, we can have Elizabeth put the slides that are the most relevant, and then we can ask her questions about that. She said a lot. I don't remember if I'll be able to remember all of that when we're actually talking on the topic. So just kind of work through the topics, and then if we have to, we'll carry the conversation on to the next meeting. So with that, we'll open public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to give public comment on the Land Development Code today? Please state your name.
Mandy Infill.
Mandy.
Hey guys, good morning. So I know you have a lot of emails from me with a lot of questions, and on that, in that sentiment, what I've been thinking about a lot lately is thinking about like the how and the why. When we're talking through this stuff, we say density increases affordable housing, but we haven't heard how and why. You know, why would the occupancy increase? What's going to happen? Comparing property taxes, you know, what ORIAD zoning is right now would be comparable to what we would become in University Place, short of the multi-unit buildings. So looking at like what is the property tax income there versus, you know, on comparable lots in University Place, or even just like running some numbers of if you add ADUs to a quarter of the lots in University Place, what would our revenue be? So is it worth it? And really looking at what's to gain because I've talked a lot about what we would lose. You guys saw Paulette's letter. We already have 6 people living behind me. Thank goodness they're girls. I'd rather have 6 girls than 3 boys, college boys. But I would really like to see us think about, you know, like you would at work, like what's going to come of this, and say how and why. I've found articles online encouraging developers to invest in older neighborhoods that are encouraging infill and doing code changes to encourage it because it will increase their profits. So documented online, it's websites geared towards developers, you know, their interests, whatever. So we can find information on what it'll look like, and that people will increase their profits. But what are the outcomes for us and our property taxes or our neighbors, whatever. And then we're talking about creating more predictable outcomes. That's one of the goals. So I think, we're predicting like a psychic, or, you know, are we going to predict based on best practices or evidence? And then multiple times I've heard Elizabeth say that, you know, we talk about putting 3 units on a lot in R2, and it always comes with a qualifier, or the affordable housing bonus comes with a qualifier that, well, it'll be really hard to do. So is nobody going to do it, or do we need to look at it by what if they do it? So, and I think if something needs a qualifier, it means it's something that needs to be looked at. My lot, Jeff worked through it with me. It will become 2 lots, and each of those lots can have 2 units. So it would easily fit Elizabeth's example. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mandy. Anyone else here to give public comment today on the land development code? We will look online once we've exhausted those present. Good morning, Marcy.
Good morning. I just have a few quick comments. Marcy Francisco. I live at 1101 Ohio. And thank you for all your work on this. This is not easy to do. I've been looking at it for a while, and it still remains confusing. But I wanted to say that I appreciated the discussion when we talked about occupancy limits, of also understanding how that relates to the parking requirements. Because we do need to try to find a balance between those two. We are heading in, by both adding more people and requiring fewer cars. We need to make sure that when we're doing that parking discussion, that it works for everyone sort of in the same way. It's easy to say, oh, if you have parking now, you can't reduce it, but why should the standards be different for someone who owns property now than for someone who buys a new lot? I appreciate the consideration of parking requirements for commercial uses adjacent to residential areas. I have a pretty easy one. There's a comment about landscaping should be located away from utility lines so that they can be in utility easements. I think it would be preferable to say what kind of landscaping would be most appropriate in utility easements to do that, rather than just say don't do it, because we're going to either have turf. And then just a fourth thing, Lawrence really has done well in establishing school gardens. And so perhaps we should allow for such gardens on commercial and industrial properties. So we talk a lot about turf, we talk a lot about native plants, but some of us like to eat tomatoes in the summer. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marcy. Anyone else interested in giving public comment this morning? I'll look online.
Good morning. My name is Samuel Carter, and at the last Planning Commission, I spoke about how minimum parking requirements make housing in Lawrence more expensive and make our streets less safe. I submitted a letter last night that expanded on this, and I would encourage you to read it, but I'll try to touch on some of the major points here right now. So minimum parking requirements are a regressive tax on low-income households. Parking requirements force people who own fewer assets in the form of personal automobiles to pay for the use of automobiles by people with more vehicles. And second point, minimum parking requirements in the proposed code also force small businesses in residential areas to serve customers with cars. They don't have a choice under the proposed code. Because businesses pass their costs off to their customers, this means that people who do not drive to these neighborhood businesses still have to pay for the cost of parking. But minimum parking requirements also constrain what can be built, especially in commercial zones in residential areas. This means that fewer types of walkable neighborhood businesses can thrive. The effect of this is shadow zoning, effectively not allowing those types of uses to exist, but it also forces people into cars. So I can't walk my kids to a dentist. I have to drive there because a dentist can't actually operate in my neighborhood because the parking requirements are too much. Now, another thing in the code is, speaking of, the proposed code right now requires in commercial zones in residential areas, requires parking for bars. That is just a bad idea. We should not, as a public policy, we're forcing bars to serve patrons who drive. But minimum parking requirements they're not necessarily looked at like an irrational basis like that. This is why Donald Shoup calls it more like sorcery than fiction. Finally, in the next year, the City Commission will be asked to vote on committing to ending traffic deaths and disabling injuries on our roads. And doing so, if they commit to that, it can unlock tens of millions of dollars in state and federal grants to fix our roads. But engineering our roads to be safer is only one part of the puzzle. The other part is land use, and that's why I'm here to talk about minimum parking requirements. They add more trips, and they make things more dangerous. They're bad public policy, bad for Lawrence, make housing more expensive, local businesses more expensive, and you don't have to take my word for this. This is something that's been researched thoroughly over many decades. And I know that spillover parking can be a problem, but the only way to solve that is through enhanced parking strategies. You cannot solve problems of spillover by anything that happens to the code. Thank you very much.
I'll look online and then we'll come back to anyone in the public. Is there anyone online who'd like to give a public comment?
Ben.
Ben, yes. Ben, would you like to unmute? Thank you.
Yep. Hey, good morning, everybody. I joined the September 5th call that Elizabeth set up to talk about landscaping and was on the chair of the Sustainability Advisory Board before. This is an enormously complex process. Thank you all for sacrificing your time and all your hard work on these things. I just wanted to say that I think that there's some great opportunities there to think carefully and add a little bit more detail about how you can encourage people to utilize native plantings and xeriscaping to the maximum extent possible. We have a lot of details in there right now about trees and turf and how to do that, specifically on things like what materials they have to use, what the maintenance is. Providing some of those details in the code, I think, will encourage people to use it rather than simply saying, use it to the maximum extent possible, but not having detail about how they do it. And I think you can also have some trade-offs. I think Marcy's comment about planting tomatoes around industrial areas is cool. I like tomatoes as well. But you can have trade-offs, for example, in the non-residential requirements for horticultural plantings and underground irrigation. Maybe if they plant native plants, they don't have to do the underground irrigation requirement, right? So if you're planting xeriscaping, for example, maybe you can get out of some other codes so that you can incentivize that practice. In regards to the percentage requirements, I know that's a really tricky subject. We have that already in buffer yards as an example where people are required as a percentage to plant evergreen trees because you want to block the view. I think you can do that with a lot of our native plants as well. So I think that percentage requirement basis is there. The last thing is we did have some good discussion around enforcement, and I think Elizabeth laid it out well. People already have to turn in some plans, like final landscaping plans for their certificate of occupancy. If they're going to do perennial vegetation or xeriscaping or whatever, that should be part of the plan, and that can set up the enforcement option for people that come out and say, look, you said you were going to mow this once a year. You've obviously got trees in here and you're not doing any kind of maintenance. Or you said you were going to have borders, which should be a requirement, if not an expectation, for the difference between natural landscaping and managed natural landscaping. So we went around about in Sustainability Advisory Board for a couple of years talking about the difference between those two. So managed natural vegetation, managed xeriscaping, I think is the way to talk about it, rather than simply somebody doesn't have to do anything and that's natural. Yeah. So that's my comments. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone else online? We'll take public comment from anyone online, and then we'll move it back to the room, and then we'll close comment. So if you're online, this is your opportunity to speak. Anyone? Great. We'll bring it back for the room for any last public comment, and then we'll move to discussion. Michael? Please state your name, and Becky will keep the time. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Michael Allman. I'm the land representative of the steering committee. Throughout this entire process, there are two lines of conversation moving in parallel: mixed use and walkable neighborhoods. These really are two sides of one coin, but they never seem to converge because of misconceptions. The mixed use conversation itself has been misconstrued into two fragments. On the one hand, the M districts rightly describe mixed use as a mix of residential and commercial. But on the other hand, planners almost exclusively speak of mixed use as only a mix of different housing types. This error is particularly frustrating in the density single dwelling discussions. It's a false dichotomy to say that R1 has mixed use because it allows duplexes, and that all the R districts are equivalent because they don't prohibit single dwelling units. That's a huge distraction. What's crucial yet ignored is what R1 does prohibit. R1 is not equitable with the other 7 residential districts because it prohibits anything above duplex and prohibits commercial. Another form of exclusionary zoning. That's what R1 is. R1 should be eliminated. Similarly frustrating is the walkability conversation. The oh-so-typical focus is on smooth sidewalks, pedestrian crossing signals, bicycle lanes, and things of that sort. But a 15-minute walkable neighborhood is not achieved by concrete, but by having a person's daily destinations within a 15-minute walk. In other words, commercial uses mixed with residential uses. Not only should the principal use tables allow commercial uses in all residential districts, existing neighborhoods should allow scale-appropriate commercial uses as well, which is a term that Elizabeth has referred to. I will also add, it's a misplaced assumption that minimum parking elimination will be a forcing factor to induce walkability. While I support it, it's really a blunt instrument that will pain some people and some neighborhoods disproportionately. And without permitting neighborhood commercial uses in all residential districts, eliminating parking minimums of itself won't achieve 15-minute walkable neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Is there anyone else here this morning to give public comment on the Land Development Code? All right, seeing no public comment, I'll bring it back for discussion. So we have little over an hour, about 70 minutes to cover these topics. How would we like to start? Do we want to start again with the occupancy, which is where we left off at our last meeting? Or would you like to start with the landscaping and environmentally sensitive lands, which were on the original agenda for today? Preference? Jane?
I'd like to start with the occupancy. I think the issue that Senator Francisco raised about occupancy and parking being entangled is good. I think density is the third part of that. I think those three things are so tied together that we really need to consider them together.
Okay.
And I have a question about occupancy, and that has to do with why are we increasing it at all? And I ask that for two reasons. Number one, we can't enforce the occupancy that we have. So it seems to me that by increasing occupancy, really what we're saying is we can't enforce it, so we're going to up the number. But what that really means is do whatever you want to do. So I'm concerned about the enforceability.
Great.
The second reason I would like to talk about that is that I think occupancy is different for families. I think it's different for people who are providing affordable housing than it is for students. And I think that we need to understand the differences in the residency that we have in this community. Simply adding more people, particularly around the university, is probably simply adding more students. And I think that is a detriment to the neighborhoods. So.
Okay, I think with that, unless anyone objects, I think we should start with those. That's a fine topic to start with. At some point, we have to cover all of these. And so I'm not sure about that September 25th vote, but I do think that's a perfectly great. So let's think about that. Elizabeth, would you mind pulling up the occupancy? Thank you. Occupancy changes, and we'll just start with that. Jane's thrown out a couple questions. Does anybody want to debate on any of those?
Sure. I by the way, driver's license age in Kansas is 17.
Okay.
Now I think about who counts in that occupancy number. I think kids have some weight too, but definitely where the potential for another vehicle rises to a little bit different level. I also think about the connection between occupancy and the impacts of occupancy, right? And I think that's a fair thing to think about. The reason for it, though, isn't just because we can't enforce it. I think the reason for it is there's a fundamental in that where it increases the opportunity for places for people to live. I get that around the university, the majority of those might likely be students and seasonal. But I don't think I share I'm not trying to put words in your mouth or anybody else's, but I don't think I believe that students count less. I think the families that are trying to afford for kids to be in school need places where they can afford to live, and we are what we are. We're a college town. We're not a college we're not a town with a college in it. We're a college town, and it's a large part of who we are. I think we can manage, though, the uniqueness of that without blanketing the entire community with a different opinion on occupancy, because it's not just about this problem area. This code is for the entire community. So I guess my suggestion would be that as we think about it, I'm not pushing back on any of the occupancy numbers there. It's not a prediction or a guess or crystal ball. I think that this is based on practices that they've gathered from around the country that in places where they've worked. But the way I think about it is to think about the impacts of that. So we know that there's an area, for example, Oread University Place, that irregardless occupancy, we have a concern about a change in parking. Well, what if we said in that area where we know that there is this concern, we've heard it from everyone, let's treat it differently so that we can mitigate the risk of increased occupancy, increased density, and parking is would be the specific thing that I would go at, so that we can allow it to occur in all new development and allow it to occur all over our community. And one way we could think about that, with parking, is to say we're going to, I use the word overlay, there's probably other vehicles to get at it, but we designate an area around this where we say we're going to keep parking requirements the same as they are today until, and implement a parking permit system as soon as the city has got that in place, but then allow everything else around the community to move towards less parking requirement, which hopefully naturally reduces cars and reduces walkability and all the other things that we want to draft behind that. That's my thought.
Great, thank you. Sharon, I think you're...
Yeah, I was going to speak to linking of the parking and the occupancy. As I've said in previous meetings, I'm in favor of, well, we talked about the compromise of one parking space per dwelling unit, as opposed to no minimum parking. But I am in favor of keeping that cap, that maximum. But that does fly in the face of, so how do we do that as for increasing occupancy standards? That's where the struggle is. So I have to say, you know, if I'm leaning towards thinking if we're going to have that maximum parking cap, which I'm very much in favor of, that maybe that doesn't mesh with increasing occupancy standards to 5 persons in that residential section. So I think that's where there could be definitely a clash there. And so, you know, I'm hesitant to increase those occupancy standards if we want to keep that parking cap on. So.
Would you trade the two, though? I mean, if there was a parking consideration like I described, would that relieve concern you had about
Well,
that?
the other concern I have about the occupancy standards, though, relates not quite to parking, but it relates to affordable housing in the sense that where you have a neighborhood that will potentially have an influx of students, what you're going to have is you're going to have some more affordable housing being purchased by people who are in it for investment properties for rental units. And I really do fear that a lot of our affordable housing units will be snapped up. If they can put 5 people in a house in the RS neighborhoods, a lot of our close in-town neighborhoods are going to be snapped up by investment property, for investment property, for rentals. And that's my other concern about increasing the occupancy standards.
I would agree. I agree with both of what you've said. I'm concerned about the nature of us being a college town, but I agree that that can't be the only thing that defines us. And so how do we strike that balance between the communities that are going to be mostly impacted by being a college town and then allow the growth and affordable housing where we also need that? But I think the way that I'm looking at this and the way it's headed is that while we're creating affordable housing and we're doing these things that in theory sound really great, I don't know that they work here in light of who's going to be buying the homes and what they're going to be used for. And instead, we're creating investment properties for some people, and then we're we are then affecting the current residents' way of life and whatnot for that investment and those investment properties. And I struggle with that a little bit. So I don't know how. Well, I think that what we're doing is we have people who are living in these neighborhoods, right? And they're residents, the citizens of Douglas County.
We're talking about around the college. I mean.
Right. I can't say myself what parts of the town are affected by college, or I don't know where the college students live, or if they're all in town or near the university. But we know that there are neighborhoods that are affected by the fact that we're a college town, and we have citizens who are living there right now. And what we're talking about are like inviting investment people who don't necessarily live here into town, and that will affect the residents, right, in a way that then doesn't really get at what the community is wanting to get, which is affordable housing, more walkability, those kinds of things, right? So I do struggle. I like your idea of, can we look at this in a way where we are addressing the fact that we're a college town, but we're also a town with residents who need affordable housing. We need walkability. And how do we do that? And I don't know that we're there yet by a blanket approach to what we're doing at the moment.
I agree. I think that's kind of, in my mind, that's where we're struggling to find a balance. We're almost exclusively the conversation that we have, the examples are, it has to do with students, has to do with proximity to the school. Let's just take that out of play. Let's just say we're going to say in that area, we're going to leave parking requirements exactly as they are, and then allow the changes that we're talking about to occur everywhere else and as our community grows. It doesn't solve the problem for reducing cars, the things that we're trying to get at in the code change around the college, where arguably it's maybe the most important place for it to occur, just because of density. But at least it allows us to move past the concerns that people have of the impact of this change happening just like that.
Mm-hmm. But I think it is important to remember that the university is moving west, and all of that housing that is going to be just west of Iowa and 23rd Street and south of there is now ripe for this investment kind of buying. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's beginning to happen. And there are, I'm told, at least one investor who's waiting for these changes so that he can proceed with his investments.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be a uniform thing for exactly those reasons. We don't know exactly where the university is going to move next. We don't know how we're going to continue to balance the need to provide both kinds of housing. I was interested in one of the letters that Ms. Enfield wrote about I think it was Ann Arbor, where the university and the city combined to talk about parking and how to deal with it. And I think that sounded like a very wonderful place to start some inquiry, separate and apart from our land use code now, or our text amendment.
I would agree with that, because I do think that, it's my very limited understanding, that the university is moving away from parking as well. Some of their parking lots, they have plans for buildings, and they're also reducing parking, so, which, not a bad thing, right? Like, what the idea is to have more walkability, but we should be in conversation with them if their policy is to also reduce parking. We're reducing parking. Are we doing it at a crazy scale, or are we doing it at a scale that works for both entities to be reducing parking at the same time?
Chelsea, Mike has his hand raised.
Okay. Mike?
Yes, thank you. And Chelsea, I was able to rearrange my schedule, so I will be on for the next hour.
Thank you, Mike.
Couple thoughts. One that I've been thinking about the last couple of weeks, and it kind of falls in line with what Gary's been talking about, is it, I don't even know if this is legally possible or if it's the right term, could we create, for lack of a better term, a parking overlay and have that be if your residence or neighborhood is within a certain distance, whether that's, I don't know if it's a half mile, a mile and a half of the university, we don't change the parking requirements. But that's just a thought that has been bounced around in my head for a couple of weeks. And then the other one goes back to occupancy levels. And I know that Senator Francisco said it, and Jane has said it, and I think Sharon, you even said it too, are our current standards, are they enforced by anybody at all, ever? And if not, why are we even bothered with it? Why don't we just remove it? And I know that's a very, very broad question. And I remember the angst when that topic was first added to the city code X number of years ago. But if it's not enforced, why do we have it? I've always been a firm believer of, if we're going to have rules, if we're going to have laws, if we're going to have policies, we should enforce them. If we don't enforce them, why do we have them?
And I would just say, I also think that's a good thing to keep in mind as we're talking. Somebody was mentioning earlier, possibly including enforcement in individual plans or in individual communications with developers. I do think it's important to remember that when those kinds of things happen, if we say that, if people promise to do something, then the citizens need to know that there's an enforcement hand behind that.
Commissioner Hayden, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So, Jeff, we're talking about carving out an area near the university. Can you talk about what that would mean for the city in terms of zoning and just sort of like, would that even be possible to carve an area out?
I think theoretically, theoretically, yes, it's possible, but I would remind everybody that there's 2 universities in town, so you'd have to have an equidistant conversation about both and not just KU in its totality there. It's possible. It'd just be a question of what Commissioner Kelso alluded to, is what's that distance and how do you do it? Because at some point with the 2 universities, you may exclude 2/3 of the city depending on the buffer that you apply to it. And just for the commission's remembrance on that one, when you talk about students and the university here, census talks about them in terms of 2 things. You have students that live here year-round, which they don't differentiate because they're basically Lawrence residents, and they have a system called transitory students, students that, for lack of a better description, disappear in May and show back up in August. Between the 2 universities, you have about 16,000 people that do that, where they disappear in May and they come back in August every year, out of about 96,000 people that live in the city of Lawrence on April 1st of any year. So when you do that kind of work, you're not talking about a very sizable population in the whole of it. The number that really sticks out there is you're talking about owner-occupied versus rental housing. 57% of Lawrence is rental and trending upwards, and has been trending upwards for 20-plus years. So my suspicion is you're going to see 57, 58, 59 coming in the near future, and that's not a trend that's unique to Lawrence. That's a nationwide item. So just so you have that information, I think it is possible. It's just a question of if you throw a certain distance around the university, how does that really impact? Could you start excluding large portions of town potentially, given the size of both Haskell and KU in the community?
And to your point, just one last thing. As the university expands westward, I mean, we can't arbitrarily just sort of pick an area because it's changing all the time.
Yeah.
So I mean,
so we probably ought to have something that's uniform.
Yeah, uniform, exactly. Sorry.
Charlie, did you? Oh, sorry.
You haven't spoken yet.
And I would like to say, what Jeff is saying about, to follow up on occupancy is I have several friends and people in my life that I know who are investors, and the occupancy isn't a reason they haven't stopped buying homes. I mean, they're continuing to buy all the time. And as Jeff was saying, we are trending that direction. The housing market currently right now is really soft, and you're not seeing a ton of investors coming in buying up the things that are available because the market's soft right now. And as that changes, I don't think occupancy is the thing holding investors back. I think it has a lot to do with market variations, which we cannot predict. They're going to ebb and they're going to flow. I don't know the statistics or anything about enforcement or any of that, but I don't believe that I would hinge my decision on investors being ready to snipe in if this goes up to 5 or more. I don't believe that to be the case.
I just want to ask a qualifying question. Why is it relevant whether a house is owned by an individual or an investor as it relates to occupancy and density? Why is that relevant?
Well, I think for me personally, part of it is because my understanding is that we are making incredibly dramatic changes, right? Like no parking, increased density, and a lot of the impetus for doing that is for affordable housing for our residents and the people who live here. And so maybe I'm wrong in understanding that that is the steering committee's policy or thought about what they're doing, but the way that it connects, in my mind, to Plan 2040 is that we're trying to help with affordable housing and walkability, right? And if what we're actually doing is just increasing outside investment, we're not getting at the heart of the policy we say we're trying to get at in the land development code. Like, so it's to me, it's not that I necessarily have a personal value for one over the other, but we're connecting back to the community value of 2040, and we're saying that that's why we're doing these changes. So then let's look at whether the how and the why. I like that. Like, are we doing that? And I would need to know a little bit more about how it wouldn't matter if it's investment or local residents who are buying those homes. To me, it seems like it does, but of course I have plenty to learn.
I think it matters from a policy perspective and how our community shapes. I personally struggle with using that as a lens when I make a decision on occupancy. Could it make a property more desirable, if you will, for an outside investor to buy it? But the thing is, if the property's for sale, it's for sale. It's for sale to anybody. And if we do things that make it more difficult for investors to be a part of this ecosystem, that ultimately drives cost. The house is for sale. If it can be bought, it can be bought. And we've got in, what you said it was 56%?
56, 57.
This is kind of a weird thing to say, but if people weren't willing to provide that investment, to provide those homes, what would be the state of that?
But I think on the flip side, though, right, there's not necessarily anything wrong with investment, but the land development code, this is our opportunity to kind of balance those policy things, right? And there are residents here who are have concerns about what are we increasing, right? I don't think the goal is to necessarily keep investors out of Lawrence. Like, certainly not my goal by any means, right, whatsoever. But I don't know that we're wanting to create a situation where we're allowing them to come in and push out and to negatively affect the current residents.
Well,
Sharon has something she's been wanting to say.
I want to think about that. The way I think, and this may be wrong, there's somebody might have some concrete data on this, which would be nice. But when I think of a house for sale, a house for sale is a house for sale, I think about we trying to conclude, they say, workforce housing. So if we're trying to encourage that, and a lot of those houses at that price point are being purchased for rental properties for investors, it's not available then as workforce housing at that price point.
Because an investor would pay more than a workforce housing person would be able to afford
Absolutely,
to pay.
especially in my mind, is if they can put 5 renters in it.
But how do we control
But
that?
I don't have the data on that.
Yeah, I don't think it
We don't
matters.
control that.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is adhere to Plan 2040 and make our neighborhoods strong, make them welcoming. And our experience in Lawrence has been that the outside investors are less consistent about maintaining property, that the renters are less interested in making sure the trash is picked up, and that makes sense. I mean, they're just renting something for a short period of time, and they have other things to do. Whereas a property owner is going to be invested in his largest investment in most cases.
And I agree with that. I think my concern there is, as Jeff is saying, trending upward nationwide. That isn't going to change regardless of occupancy.
No. And
Does that make sense? Like,
It does
yeah,
make sense.
yeah.
And I wasn't speaking of
No,
every
yeah.
investor's waiting. I just know about one.
Right, right,
So-
yeah. And I think,
And you have some experience with people who
yes,
they're
yeah.
just buying the properties as quickly as
If
they
a house is
can.
for sale, they're buying a house.
Madam
Commissioner
Chair, if I
Thomas, you wanted to
may.
weigh in earlier, and are you good? Okay, great.
Just two things I want to kind of, if I may piggyback on it. I think we're talking about two things and they're not quite congruent. And one, I want to talk about enforcement because I think we're going around it and I just want to kind of dive in on that one there. When you talk about rentals, you're not talking just about owner occupancy and rental housing. What you're talking about is tenancy of people in those houses. And what you see in the tenancy in most places is renters stay long term. They're not, what you tend to see is, it's a 1 year and you might move. That is out there and that's the life of it. But what you look and see in the data typically is there are tenants that are there for long term. So quite frequently you would find out that they don't own the house, but you've lived next to them for 15 years and you think they own the house. So it's something you see when we talk about workforce housing and affordable housing is tenancy is sometimes just as important as, owner and renter. And when you have these conversations, so I don't want to say that's something out there. I just want you to be aware of that one. And in terms of enforcement on that one, if something is on a plan and it's there and it's missing, we're going to enforce on it. So if there's trees missing from a landscape plan, we're going to enforce on it. If you have parking spaces missing from your site, we're going to enforce on it. If we get a question about over occupancy, we enforce on it. Now the question that becomes on those is how long does it take us to do the investigation to get to a point where we can go to that next level? And sometimes with these cases, they take a long time. And having worked on over occupancy cases in the past and in a previous stop that I worked at, they can take months because with the record of information you have to have before you can go to court is extensive. And sometimes it's not easy to get. And so that's why you see sometimes we take these calls and they take us a long time to work out, is because it's not as simple as just someone's going to admit to having an over-occupancy. You have to build the evidence to go to that next level, and that takes a while. But we'll just, I think in all the conversations we've had here, I just want to be very clear. If it is on a site plan, we're enforcing it. If it's on a document, we enforce it. Now, questions about code compliance work on, it's complaint driven. We have 2 officers that cover 35 square miles and 96,000 people. That takes us a little bit of time to get to some things, and depending upon, is it a life safety issue or is it a street tree, can sometimes be a different conversation about it. So we kind of have to pick and choose which ones we're going to depending upon the severity of the case. But we're going to enforce on it. If we get a complaint, we will act on it, just so you have that information.
Elizabeth has her hand up. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Jeff, did you get in everything you wanted to say on that one?
Yes, by all means.
Okay, so I had a couple things I wanted to add that I'm not hearing in the conversation. So there, and when I was researching this, I did find some discussion of communities seeing that when they reduce the occupancy limits, when they put that ceiling in, they're spreading the students, right? Because you now need more housing for the same number of students. So, if we want to talk about working within existing housing opportunities for students, allowing a slightly higher occupancy may allow for more people to be accounted in whatever is already on the ground. I think the second thing I want to weigh in on this is much of what we're talking about, and particularly when we link occupancy, parking, and density, is a proxy discussion for, is Lawrence growing? Which Plan 2040 has tackled as a policy discussion. Lawrence is growing. You guys haven't decided to stop growth. You haven't decided to shunt everything off to Douglas County or tell DeSoto good luck. So the question is, what tools are we using here, not to stop the growth, but to manage the growth into the locations where the city can handle it? So some of this where we're really trying to peel stuff off and backpedal is not necessarily in alignment with plan policy. So that's maybe something that we want to keep in mind. Yep, we're going to grow. Yep, it's not going to feel great. Where is the code going to guide it?
Should we take a heat check on that?
Yeah, probably should.
What?
Oh, do you want to talk through where we're at with this so we can kind of see what direction we're all feeling?
Where we're at with occupancy?
I was going to make a proposal if you're up for
Yeah, that's what thank you.
Sure. If you're ready. Yeah.
comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Under the banner, in my way of thinking, the whole topic of occupancy is about having places for people to live, increasing places for people to live. Understanding impacts is important, of course. Here's a suggestion. Occupancy stays as proposed in the new code. We ask staff to prepare a recommendation on how a parking overlay, and where it should exist to mitigate the risks of sudden increase of density in certain areas. Around KU specifically, I'm not sure about it west by Haskell. I get the consideration for that, but there may be areas beyond KU, there may be parts in Deep East, there may be parts in North, but to have them come back with a recommendation on what a parking overlay area might be. And then I'll throw out something kind of provocative, that if we're going to do this, right, if we're going to provide that overlay, the rest of the community goes to what the original code proposed. That's no parking requirement. Just the one per unit. But if we're going to provide an overlay here, then go to no parking requirement for everywhere else, including new development.
Don't be sorry. We're happy to hear you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, to start off, I would like to mention that if we're going to focus on affordable housing And if you're going to focus on try to, get more out of the land, we should not be too worried about investors. It both come hand to hand. Investor always going to be there, no matter what. The only thing they're worried about is the return on investment. If the house is more affordable, then the rent might be a bit lower. But investors are always going to be there, no matter what. Whether if the house is $500,000 or $250,000, always going to be there, no matter what. So my opinion is let's focus on making those houses as affordable as possible, just for the sake of residents and the plan for 2040. I agree with your opinion on reducing parking to no minimum. I agree with you 100% of that. But my question is, where are we at on the maximum? Because I keep hearing things like reducing cars, and apologies, but I haven't seen that on Plan 2040, something that says we're planning on reducing vehicles in a city where there's more dealership than grocery stores. So I agree 100% with making neighborhoods more walkable. Yes, I agree with you, but reducing vehicles and cars, it's not going to happen. Look around. So we have to work on that. So the maximum, as we stand today, what is it?
So under what you're saying, when you say no parking requirements, what would that do for Commissioner Baroto's scenario? Like, does that mean that you can have parking if you wanted?
You can. I think there are some maximums out there, and I can't cite it off the top of my head. I think there are some maximums, and particularly around commercial.
Yeah,
I can't cite it off the top of my head.
the maximum's like 2 or something. I mean, they're very low maximum.
Oh, yeah, and a resident, yeah, that's right, and a resident, yeah. So the maxes are there. I actually have some concerns about that a little bit myself, but.
But your proposal
Okay.
would remove the maximums, right? You'd say no requirements.
No, I'm saying no minimum requirements.
No minimum requirements.
So thank you
Oh,
for
okay.
calling that out. I
Okay.
wasn't addressing the maximum. I
I
have
see.
my own concerns about what the max
Okay.
are right now. But that's not something that we've really been.
Well, because the way I see it, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to restrict landowners of what it is that they can build. And what I'm trying to say, I've seen a lot of houses. I'm yet to see a house that has 7-car garage and two bedrooms. I haven't seen that.
There's a lot of 3-car out there.
100, I agree.
Right now, if I remember right, the residential maximum off-street maximum is 2.
Okay.
Which means my 3-car garage is out of compliance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's not out of compliance. If I'm in
You couldn't
redevelopment,
rebuild it.
Right.
Mhm.
If I'm building new,
And-
according to the max right now.
What I heard in the last meeting is that we were possibly proposing for a maximum car garages of 1 per bedroom. Does that still stand? Or
1 per
it's
dwelling.
no longer there?
1 per dwelling.
Well, that was a minimum.
That was the minimum.
Yeah.
That was the minimum,
We're
yeah.
talking about the most you would be allowed to have.
The most you'd be allowed to have, what is it as we speak?
Currently, it's written as
And what
2.
he's saying is, did we discuss and did we conclude on increasing the maximum or changing the maximum from a fixed 2 to a variable 1 per bedroom?
I think
or some
Commissioner
formula.
Munch and I both agreed that felt pretty restrictive, but I don't.
I agree with, yes, I agree with Commissioner Munch on that, and that feels very
I'm not trying to speak for
restrictive.
him, I apologize. I see him nodding. But
Let's ask Elizabeth where we landed on that. Just-
Reason why I ask you is because it's a two-way street. Yes,
Right.
we can remove minimum parking to get to affordable housing, to get to those developers who say, there's a lot here, where if we remove the minimum parking, we can fit 4 homes. Yes, let's do that. Let's help. But you have the landowner who says, hey, you know what? I want to buy this land. I want to build my house, and I want a 3-car garage because I'm going to have 5 bedrooms. I have 4 kids. Why am I restricting that landowner?
I agree.
And also Plan 2040 talks about diversity. So we try to make all neighborhoods the same. Why not allow that landowner to have what he wants?
So I would just amend what I'd suggested to include a change in max to 1 per bedroom. Just put it out there. What I'm saying is occupancy status increase as proposed, parking overlay to protect areas that are currently have and may have a problem, to remain as is. The rest of the community, commercial, residential, new development, redevelopment, no parking requirement. Doesn't mean you can't have parking, just no parking requirement, no minimum.
No minimum, yeah, exactly.
And then the max change from a restriction of 2 to a max of 1 per bedroom.
Right.
I do think that with the overlay, right, we would need to be thinking about it. My guess would be that it would need to be any university-owned property, right, which is quite a bit. So, I mean, only because we can't predict their growth, we don't, and you can't say like, well, this part of campus and not that part of campus, right? So like that, I'm not against a parking overlay, but I do think before voting on something like this or whatever, I'd like to see what that looks like in the sense that it could be half of Douglas County, right? And the university, I mean, they own a lot out in the township. And so I just am kind of curious about like, what that would kind of look like. And then we would also need, for equity purposes, I think, to put Haskell in it as well, I'm guessing. I don't know, we'd have
That's
to
what
run
Jeff
it
was
past
saying.
legal,
Yeah.
right?
And I think
to
that
see.
would be my hesitation on the overlay in general, is the bubble that will create is going to be very large. And I don't know how manageable that is, and I don't want to put words in Jeff's mouth now that he's gone, but I feel like he was extremely hesitant on that proposal in terms of how staff could handle or manage that based on.
I think he is hesitant. I think
and
it represents some work, yeah.
I would propose what you said, removing the parking overlay.
How do we, though, provide protections to the areas that are going to be impacted by this?
It's only for redevelopment, right, that's impacted?
If you take out the overlay, we're basically back to where we're at.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And you just basically just gotten rid of the no parking, which
Right.
we already talked about.
So
Right.
This is a way to task forward is to say,
Without knowing what that potential overlay might look like, how can we say that it will be a bad thing? We don't know how much space it would cover.
and
I think it's worth an investigation.
yeah, I'm saying let's defer to, the concept is we're going to do this.
Right.
We're gonna ask staff to bring a recommendation back on what that should be.
Okay.
And then ultimately, yeah, it's going to be actually not up to us. It's going to be up to City Commission. But what we've provided the City Commission then is we've exhausted, I don't mean that in a bad way, we've carefully exhausted the topic and the concerns around this. We're saying something has to be done different than just no parking requirements inside these areas that are already congested. We're just not ready for it today.
Got it.
So this is a method that we could use to manage it.
Could I ask a point of clarity? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The timeframe on that, you're asking staff to kind of research and bring some time back. Would that be for your September Planning Commission meeting? And if so, I think there might be some,
Yeah.
that may be difficult.
For me personally, if we adopt this set of things as a concept, that we send that on to City Commission, this is the concept, and then it's up to you to work with City Commission on defining what that is. They're ultimately going to be the ones that decide anyway. That would be what I would suggest, but it identifies it. Our recommendation is you've got to think about this and protect it. City commissioners, people are going to decide on it, and this is our recommendation for how you get at it. And then let them work out what it is, working with you to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Working on the equity issues, working on the question of it.
I do think that's part of our work. Yes, the City Commission will absolutely, they are like the people that make the decision, but I think ideas and concepts have been set out there. The Planning Commission is kind of responsible for providing some more black and white. This is our recommendation for what the code would look like, up or down vote, statutory requirements then for what their vote would look like. So I do think it's important for us to kind of have a document that we're all really comfortable with, whatever that might end up looking like, instead of just some real general principles. So just want to toss that out there.
Yeah.
Because basically what we're doing is a text amendment, and we already have the rules that we should be following for a text amendment. We need to know what the changing condition is that we're trying to address and how we recommend.
So it sounds like we've got some ideas, which I think that maybe people are interested in, but we don't have enough concrete information about how that would all come together to maybe move forward on that particular proposal this morning. Are there other thoughts about occupancy, other proposals people want to toss out when we're talking about the combination of the occupancy, parking, and density?
Not necessarily parking, but we talked about ADUs. And we talked about, and I want to know where we landed on that. I think we said it was some formula tied to bedrooms. And Elizabeth, what did we land on as far as ADU occupancy?
Hang on, I think we had 2 per bedroom.
So
was where we stopped the discussion, but I'm not sure everybody was on board with that one.
Right, and I just want to revisit that because I think that we
Yep.
kind of left it open-ended. And Commissioner Hayden, I was wondering, just as something we can discuss, if we should just make it the same as the primary residence. Like, why should the ADU requirements be any different than the primary residence, right? So the primary residence is like 5 unrelated individuals. The ADU should be the same, you know? So I'm just as a point of way to start the discussion.
I think that's a wonderful question, and since I am not a planning, I don't have a PhD in planning, I'm going to toss that out to the group. But I do think that my understanding is there's a difference between the concept of an ADU and a primary residence, and they're for different purposes, right? And so there might be concerns that you're not using an ADU in the exact same way, and the idea is not to have 2 primary units on one chunk of land. But
my concern is that I think the way we had it, the ADU might end up having more people than the primary residence.
Right.
And I'm just saying that why not have them treat it as a residence? Don't treat it any differently. That's what I'm suggesting.
I guess I really understood an ADU as being for 1 or 2 people. That
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
That
It's an accessory.
It really is an accessory. It's not a, because there is the option to put 2 duplexes on. And I suspect that anybody who has room for 2 duplexes would rather do that than.
Right.
and-
Sure. Have an ADU.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And I think secondarily on yours, did we land on whether an ADU should be considered as density? It was in one of her slides from last month.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we fully circled back to whether it should be like 0.75 or 1.
Per bedroom, right?
For density.
For density.
For density.
Yeah, that you guys didn't resolve that. Thanks for bringing that back. So where we were on this question was in those places where the city wants to get to density. So some communities see ADUs. You like my favorite way of thinking about it. It's a bubble, right? So my house and my detached garage, if I turn that into an ADU, that's all considered 1 for density. It's just my bonus that I can kick my adult age kids out to the ADU. So that's a way to think about it. But in some communities where they're saying, hey, we've got to get some extra housing going in here, and we want to incentivize people to do that. If you're going to, put in the ADU, we're going to consider it density, and everybody's happy that we're moving forward with that. So, and I think in the middle is some communities say, okay, it's a half a unit for density purposes. It wouldn't matter. Remember, if we remember, I'm going to go back to way back at the beginning, the list of changes from the Planning Commission, if we can pull the slides back up for a sec. So where we stand right now is we're going to exempt R1, R2, and R3 infill development from minimum density. So no incentive to put an ADU in there. To the extent that someone is doing the type of development in R4 or R5 that is maybe row homes with ADUs or small lot single families with ADUs, giving them that ADU as a density may help them get to as many units as are feasibly possible on the lot. So long way to say if you give them some credit, it will help in the higher density districts.
I don't have any difficulty with the idea that an ADU might have more people in it than the residents. I don't know that needs to be for me anyway.
Okay.
Like if I'm a single person, does that mean that I can only rent my ADU to 1 person? Like I couldn't rent it to a couple?
Yeah.
Or
Because it's accessory, I think of it as that lovely lady who said she wanted to know, can she rent an ADU and then rent her house and then live in an ADU? I see it as the kind of thing that for long-term care, instead of going to a nursing home, you might be able to hire 1 or 2 people.
age in place,
Yeah, to age in place, to have somebody there who can help you all the time stay in your house.
I think there are many scenarios that that an ADU and an ability to use it in natural ways benefits our community and the people that are in it. To me, again, all of this is just about making places for people to live.
I agree.
And I know there's impacts, and we ought to be thoughtful about it, but boy, that's my North Star in this is
But
I want to
instead
get
of-
stuff out of the way.
Instead of an ADU, why don't you just build a second unit on your property? If you're going to have 5 bedrooms in your house and you want 5 bedrooms in an ADU, why don't you just make that?
That might be the way for them to go. I don't know. I don't know where they are. And
I think the code allows those options, right? But I would like your opinion on what you think an ADU, should it be considered as density or no? I'm curious about your thoughts because I feel like you've had some like really good opinions on how those should function, and I just would like to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, you flatter me.
I know the way to your heart.
Chocolate. I really do see it as an accessory kind of thing. I'm at the stage in my life where I'm thinking about what's the next step.
Mhm.
And for me, an ADU would be perfect, absolutely perfect, because it would allow me to age in place. And in terms of density, I think you add it. I mean, I think that would help the people in the higher density units get to the density that is required.
Elizabeth's suggestion of a half credit, if you will, like an ADU is like half 0.5 towards density, is something I've been thinking through. But I just, that would be my question to the rest of the commission. If I think it should count as density, I don't know if it should be a 1.
Am I not correct in thinking that an ADU cannot be larger in size? It can only be half of what the principal residence is? That's a requirement right now? Yeah, I think that is correct.
That is correct.
But if we don't have any kind of occupancy, like if it's got the same amount of occupancy, like then it should probably count for density as a 1, right? Like, I mean, if we're saying that it's a smaller in size, but you can stack it full of people, to me, that's still density, right? For a full, complete density.
That was my question, is
versus,
what were people thinking?
Yeah, and then at that point, why are we having ADUs? I mean, it just... sometimes there are different types, and the idea is to allow certain types and not just have everything look exactly the same, but we're all calling it something. We're just calling it different names, right? And that's kind of what this conversation sounds like to me, is like we're calling it an ADU because it can only be half the size of the residency as far as a building footprint, but we're still treating it as though it can be full of people. I don't know.
I have been grappling with, and I think all of us are, grappling with how do we take Plan 2040, which you said North Star, but that is our guiding principle, and take what it suggests, not always requires, but suggests, and turn it into policy. And we 10 are put in a position that the staff, the group that did the 140 pages worth of work, drops it on us, and we are put in a position in a very short period of time to try and figure out the intricacies of all of the requirements that we have. One, I would push back on our having to make a decision on September, whatever it is, 25th, and say, we're ready to do it. I certainly cannot say I am ready to do it at this time. So the devil is always in the details. If we say a guiding principle is affordability, that is what we are looking at, are we really making our decisions on affordability? If we say our guiding principle is walkability in a neighborhood, are the decisions that we are making really based on that? then you throw in automobiles. I have looked at, and I am in favor, I will say, of reducing car traffic, period, the end, reducing it. That is, but does that really come from Plan 2040? Is that really what is being required there? I'm not certain I see it. Maybe it is. Density. So philosophically, I am struggling with taking what I believe the committee that wrote these rules and that we are charged with making informed, with data, informed recommendations to the city council, and I am loath to make recommendations or simply say to the city, now, we couldn't come up with anything, so we're going to let staff give you something and you ferret it out. I think we are charged with thoroughly exploring and making a decision, a recommendation to the city. And I certainly am still struggling with translating philosophy into hard outcomes. And I have heard, I think from everybody, things that have gotten me to think, and the people out here and the ones that have spoken before and sent us emails, that I have not settled in my own mind what the outcome ought to be. I either need more time, more information before I am ready to think about overlay districts, keeping no parking, don't care about parking, minimum parking, before I feel comfortable making a decision at this point.
I do think that I hear what you're saying, and I do think we seem to be going round and round and some of these topics and having great proposals, but then not necessarily feeling like we have enough information because we don't have access to some of the policymakers or people with the policy ideas. Elizabeth has graciously been here a lot to answer these questions. Sometimes we don't even necessarily know what to ask. But I really, what I hear you saying basically is what Ms. Infill said when she provided her comment, which is really on all of these things that we're saying we want, how and why, like why do we want them and how is this code getting at them? And I don't know if this would help or not, and I know we're supposed to take a vote in 2 meetings from now, but the idea for me is, what if we started, instead of framing things around just topics and discussing them, trying to come to a conclusion about the how and the why. So what we're talking about here are, what I hear is a lot of us actually expressing the same value set, and I hear that value set in the Plan 2040. I don't think any of us are off value set wise as far as what the community is, but we're having a hard time seeing that in action in the code, right? Like, if we do this, this is what that translates to. This is how we get to walkability, these parts of the code together. And I don't know if that would help, but it seems like answering the question on the occupancy. So if the goal of the occupancy is more places for people to live, like, how does this really do this? And in what way does this do this? Instead of just, obviously, if you allow more 5 people to live there, you've increased occupancy, right? But then how does that tie together? The how and the why does seem to be slipping through us in a lot of our conversations. And I don't know if I'm the only one who feels that way, but I feel like we get close to it and then move to a new topic or something. And I don't know what to do about that, but I think all of us seem hesitant because the how and the why isn't being, and not just the how and the why, but that's a very nice framework, I think, for what a lot of people are feeling. If anyone wants to answer the how and the why for occupancy, take a stab at it.
Yeah, so honestly, what we're looking at right now is the how and the why. The why is for places for people to live. That's the why. That's why we're doing this. The how, in this particular case, includes recognizing some of the impacts that these changes might bring. And that's why we gnash over those details, rightfully so. I do think, though, that a couple of things. One, staff and the consultant group, Elizabeth and her team, all of this work has been done and tested and nested in 2040, our comprehensive plan. Every single thing is consistent with how those bodies feel 2040, what 2040 asks of our community in the code. I just take that at face value. Is it 100% right? Maybe not. Maybe there's something here or there, or maybe I would have an interpretation of that that's different than that. But I take that at face value. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking, okay, if 2040 says that I've got to do this differently. And then, so to me, it comes down to this tactical thing, one tactical bit at a time. We've got this tactical question, occupancy. We've gotten feedback, and our own understanding that says there's some impacts from that we want to mitigate. We had conversations about investors for who owns what. But at the end of the day, we've got this thing, and our responsibility is to make a recommendation. We want it to be thoughtful. We want it something that we all feel good about as individuals, but there's 10 of us. The chances that we're going to get to 100%, yeah, this is exactly right, are pretty darn small. So I just don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. Mm-hmm. So I say, okay, in this particular thing, there's a big open question about what that overlay looks like. At the end of the day, are we all going to agree on what that is? I'm not sure. We're not going to be able to get to that between now and the end of this month. It's probably going to take quite a bit of other discussion, and that is going to involve some policy things as well that are going to ultimately be with the City Commission. So I'm going to say, look, if this in general makes sense for us, then maybe we say, okay, in general this makes sense, we're going to write this down, we move on to the next topic. It doesn't mean that it's done, but it gets us on to the next thing.
And I would say I agree with you about the timeline being truncated, but I'm not sure we get a choice based on what Jeff has said in the last 3 meetings. I don't think City Commission cares.
And I say,
if I'm being honest.
I got to tell you, I struggle with the idea that we're truncating or rushing here. We have had more public meetings on this than on any other topic. Yeah. The work's been going on for years. We've had access to this information for months. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not rushing on this. Yeah. Right. We're getting down to it.
Right.
We're
in the weeds.
Well, and probably should be, but we just want to be able to advance through it.
Yes.
Well, I disagree with you on a couple of points. Yeah. I understand that we're looking at affordable housing, not just increasing the numbers of bedrooms in this community. And I think that is a different topic. And I think it's a more constrained topic. And I think that it's one we need to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And I think the how and the why is important. I certainly have questions about that have yet to be answered. We talk about workforce housing. I don't even know if maybe that's discriminatory. It seems to me we want affordable housing at all levels, and we need to provide for that. We also have rules and regulations as to what we're supposed to do. This is a text amendment. This is not something that has never been done before. And the staff will give us a review of the text amendment, what we're trying to accomplish, and how this amendment does that. That's part of our statute as it is right now. And I think that will help focus everything. And I think it has to be focused. I think we have to know that the words are right, not just the concepts, because it is a law, and we're charged with making a recommendation on a law.
Yeah. I respect what you're saying, Jane. I do. I think the reality of it is, with the time we've got into it, the city it could change. I mean, it's not up to me for sure, but I think the city has given us an expectation that we do our work and we conclude with a recommendation. And if our recommendation at the 25th is we just can't agree, we're going to vote no, we don't approve, that body of work still goes to the City Commission. Mm-hmm. Our opportunity, though, right now is to go through as much as we possibly can, surface problems and issues, And if we can come to an agreement or recommendation, great. If we can't, let's come to a set of the things that we believe the city needs to consider as they're making a final policy decision. But every minute that we gnash on how much time we've got left, we're missing our opportunity to cover more things.
Sharon has something she'd like to say.
I said, all I know is right now that if we never get to some of these sections, I mean, it will be a really long meeting on the 25th, because I'm going to go through the topics that we have not covered yet. When we get to landscaping, I have some comments, and if we never get to that, it's going to happen on the 25th.
I've still got 6 questions from today, yeah.
Yeah, so it seems to me that what we've done is taken on the topics that we're just not sure we're going to be able to resolve at the moment, or at least that we keep going round and round about, and we maybe want some more information. So occupancy, density, and parking, great topics for today, but we're still kind of in the same situation that we were before. I think we've had some great discussion. So if my thought would be, like, let's see if there are last minute thoughts about that information that we want on that. We've got a proposal out, and we can certainly continue to talk about that, or we can try to move on to another topic, substantive topic, with the never mind, 10 minutes that we have left, right? So that's kind of where I do think that that's something to think about. And Jane, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask a question about parking. And I think it's a question for Elizabeth. We've talked about no minimum parking or no maximum parking, but except where commercial meets residential. And do we have a proposal as to how that happens?
Yes, so that was a recommendation that came out of steering committee right before we posted the adoption draft. So we were able to go back in and incorporate the minimum parking standards. So when we started the draft way back when, we did have minimum parking standards for mixed use and commercial. So we rolled those back in, and they're in the draft that's posted right now.
And how do we?
And so now they're just applicable to, as you said, the commercial adjacent to residential.
The commercial is built in a field and residential will come later, or may come later or may not. How do we deal with that at all, or do we just say?
No, it's particularly focused on where that interaction works right now. Let me pull the draft up while you're pondering that. Hang on a sec.
It's fine, I can look. I'll look.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other thoughts, discussions, questions, ready to move to a new topic? We have 9 minutes left this morning.
I'll just throw out, just particularly in terms of guidance with Plan 2040. Plan 2040 incorporates Transportation 2040, and in that document, it does speak to reducing miles driven by cars, walkability, all those sorts of things we're talking about. So yes, it is incorporated.
And now that you bring that up, I actually am very interested in the idea of walkable. We keep talking about walkability, trying to cut down on cars. And I do think that some of the public comment has been about like walkability versus a 15-minute walkability. Is walkability just mean that you can walk along the sidewalk, or does walkability mean that we've created a community in which you can walk to the things you need, right? Those are two different concepts, and I'm not sure that we've really had the conversation about that or talked about which one we're encouraging in this particular code. I didn't know, again, only
May I jump in on that?
Yes, of course.
Just to let you guys know how we interpreted it, in case you apply a different interpretation. This is a conversation that we've had at the steering committee. Our interpretation of Plan 2040 is not that it requires a 15-minute walkable community, because it would have said that. So we have opted to require connections that ultimately lead to walkability and bikeability and accessible movement for people in wheelchairs. So it is applied in a piecemeal fashion, like we do a lot of things in communities. As redevelopment or new development comes online, they have this connectivity and mobility requirements, which are all the pieces in the puzzle to putting together a more easily non-vehicle movable community. So we took that bigger picture approach to it because we didn't have the specific 15-minute neighborhood instruction. So if you guys want to hone that down at all, that's where the code is. So let us know if we're going in a different direction.
No, I just think it's really important for us to keep that in mind as we talk about what it is we're trying to accomplish, and maybe why some of us are feeling tension when we look at some of these things, because we're thinking 15-minute walkability, and really what the code is getting at a bit more is general walkability. I don't know.
15-minute is kind of that ideal state. We're a long ways away from it, but it's about creating an environment where that might develop.
Facilitates
Right?
that direction.
Not required, but it enables it
Yes.
as time goes.
Yeah. To me, that just seems kind of. Oh, yes, please.
When I hear the discussion about walkability and 15-minute walkability, I agree. It's like we don't really have a definition of what it means. But having a son that lives in New York City, and I think of large metropolitan areas like New York City, even Kansas City, I won't say is a walkable city, or Overland Park. When if my son from his apartment needs to get anything in his life, he's 3 minutes away from a subway stop, which by the time he comes up from that subway stop gets him to anywhere he needs to go within a block or two, or from his apartment, he's maybe a 5-minute walk away from a corner mom and pop grocery store or a deli, and they're literally every 3 or 4 blocks throughout New York City. We don't have that. We're not going to have that. We have large chains and it's certainly not affordable for somebody to come and say, oh, hey, even though we do have that now downtown, that small convenience store did open up downtown. I hope it survives. And maybe that can be the model for what we're wanting. But right now, no, we don't have that. And it's as Gary said, it's way out there. And then we're certainly never going to have a subway system. We don't have a mass transit system such that I can go stand on a corner and in 30 seconds, the amount of time I might wait for a subway train, I'm going to get picked up and taken somewhere. And the whole reason all those things need to be close if we're going to be a walkable society is if they're not close, I'm not going to walk 15, 20, 30 minutes to go get one day's worth of groceries and then have to walk back, because you can't go get a week's worth of groceries for your family and then come back and be able to carry it all. So now we're back to cars. So it is a dilemma that we're all facing, and we don't really have the definition of other than what Elizabeth said, that we're trying to connect to make it more walkable or exercisable, but not really a true 15-minute walkability scenario.
I'm not looking at this in terms of a 15-minute walkability, just given the current infrastructure, but I am sort of thinking about it in how Elizabeth mentioned it, in terms of making those connections possible. So that we're sort of iterating towards a more connected community, that you can use something else besides a car if you can and are willing to do that. So that's sort of where I'm looking at. The ideal is sort of that 15-minute maybe, but right now it's just making those connections. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm still reluctant to go forward with R1 zoning, because that to me just ends the connectivity part of this. When we put in large lots and large houses in the very limited corridor that we have for building and affordable housing and density, that doesn't get us there. R1 zoning does not get us there going forward. So that's another topic. I'll bring that up again when it gets to September.
Well, but I do think it's important because they connect, right? And that's how we start to see those connections.
I agree. I agree with you on except when, for example, at the comment from the gentleman from LMH, that there are certain people who want certain houses and they want to move to our community to bring something to our community, and they want to live on that R1.
And we have 7%, if I'm correct, of legacy
Yes.
housing that exists.
I agree with you, but we will be limiting the pool. It's a market. It's a free market.
And
So
that's the
why to
trade-off
limit it?
I'm willing to make.
Yes.
I don't think the community can afford it, though, is the problem.
In my
because
opinion-
we lose out on opportunities from outside people who need to live and want to live in this community for the reasons that they can do the same thing in Overland Park right now.
There's also a letter from the Economic Development Corporation
That supports
expressing the need for executive housing for any community. And Frank, well, we're going to talk about it in September. We are in September. We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
All right.
And on that note, it is 9:29, so we will look forward to that debate at another meeting.
I would like to add one thing last thing about parking and the concept of walkability. Everything that Commissioner Kelso mentioned, I agree with you 100%. Something else that I want to mention is that I haven't seen a graphic of it. We probably won't. Is most of us in the city, we're time constrained. Like, if we could add one more day to the week, we should, right? But it's not possible. So most of us don't work 5, 10, or 15 minutes from work. Most of us drive to work. And in a city that, when you go and stand in front of a parking and a bus stop, you don't see a bus driving by every 5, 10, 15 minutes. You have to wait an hour. So you depend on your car to what? Like me, for example. I get up in the morning early, and I have to take my 2 daughters to school, and they go to different schools. So I depend on my car to go to one school. Sometimes I have to come back to the house, pick up the one that's still sleeping, and then go and go drive to the other school, and then go to work. And I could not do that if I depend on the bus system. Currently, right? It is the only thing, but.
Thank you. I do think it would be helpful. Could we get that list of things that the questions that the planning commission? I know that it's in your PowerPoint, but if we were able to get like just a list of the things that the planning commission has brought up and has not resolved, and then a list of things in which we think we might have some resolution, and then everyone could look at that and see what other topics they have that we have not yet gotten to, and not that we will be emailing that around or anything, but we can either work with staff to figure out how to create something that we want to go through, or we can all at least have that for ourselves and then present it and have it in mind at our next meeting. Because I do think that there are topics we need to get to that we haven't, and we keep talking about some of the same ones without a resolution. So just a tracking of where we're at and where, as a group, we would like to go, and then as individuals, topics that are important to us that we have not even gotten to yet. I think that would be helpful. So I don't know if we could get something like that between now and the next meeting. That would be
Yeah, I can, with Elizabeth's help, I can send that out to you all. And then if you have specific items that you want to talk about, make sure they're addressed, you can just email me. We can work along with the chair to get that agenda set up.
Yeah. And of course, by no means would that be exclusive, but it's just if you have things that you want to let everybody know you're interested in bringing up soon, and people can be thinking about that, that would be maybe helpful for organization.
So to clarify that, so would it be helpful if, let's say, we're never going to get to one of these topics, that I can just send these little notes to Becky, and that'll at least get in the packet so that the city commission has a potential to.
Sure, yes.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I also did not mean cutting out your ability to raise those issues or us to have, I didn't mean just to get to the city commission. I meant like so that we got to them, if possible. So, great. We do not need a motion, is that correct?
We do not, no.
So I will say that we are adjourned.
Yes.
All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Elizabeth, is she still there? Elizabeth, are you still there?